In the movie, we rattle a lot of cages. And I think that we obviously rattled a cage that he and his people felt a little bit offended by. So I can only imagine it was maybe a warning, this might not be a film you want to actually release. Because it was probably 4 or 5 months before the release of the movie. It wasn't the first threat we got, but it was a very personal one.
I go to a lot of documentaries. I found this at one theater here in Washington that doesn't normally run documentaries.
Yeah, you know, we almost all of the screenings we had across the country when it was in theaters were AMC's, they were Cinemarks, they were the major theater chains. Like I said, you know, this movie, I was never a huge documentary fan. You know, I'm a movie fan. And I wanted to make something that I wanted to see, something that was funny and engaging and dark at times. And so I didn't really make this for necessarily a quote-unquote documentary audience, but more for a mainstream audience. So, you know, by design, we try to have it, and the mainstream theaters wanted to have it, so it was great.
But it came out of, as I read, a serious moment in your life.
In a serious moment in my life.
Yeah, in other words, why you decided to do a documentary, even though you say it's entertainment. But, I mean, I read that you sitting around one night thinking about Rwanda, which is not exactly a light subject.
Don't we all think about that as we're sitting around on our couch watching TV? You know, it was funny. It was definitely an event I could put my finger on exactly the moment that this kind of thing triggered in my mind. And it was, you know, it was Saturday night. I've got kids, so on Saturday nights you sit home and you watch movies. And I was watching the Michael Moore movie, Bowling for Columbine. And while Michael and I have very different political views, I've always looked at him as a really significant figure in documentary films because he makes films I wanted to see. They're funny, they're engaging, they're entertaining. That's the kind of, you know, documentaries I wanted to see. So I was watching Bowling for Columbine, which I had seen before, so I was kind of drifting off. And, you know, for some reason or another, I was thinking about, and I can't tell you why, I was thinking about Rwanda. And I was thinking, here is a genocide that happened, like not in the olden days that we read about in the history books. It happened while I was sentient, while I was working. And I said, Rwanda, forget that. There's one going on right now. As I sit here, you know, in my comfortable, you know, apartment in Manhattan, there are people who are running for their lives in terror. And I said, how could this be in our day and age? And I thought to myself, you know, as a society, we're so much better off in almost every way you can imagine. Whether you look at, you know, availability of food, medicine, in almost every way, we're better off as humans. Yet the one way we're not is security. We're probably maybe even more insecure than we were before. And I thought, whose role is this, right? Whose job is it to stop these things? And it became very obvious it was the job of the UN. And they were failing miserably, and that's kind of when the whole thing kind of clicked together.
How would you describe your political views?
I would call it right of center. You know, I mean, not reflexively. There are things I probably go a little bit left to, and things I go a little bit more right to, but I would say right of center would accurately describe me.
So how much did this documentary cost you?
Whew, I don't even want to say it cost. It's embarrassing. So it cost us about $2 million to make, and another $2 million to release.
You're going to get the money back?
No. We'll get, I mean, it was very, very successful, one of the more successful documentaries of the past couple of years, but the economics in the film business, particularly the documentary business, are such where it's very hard to recover your costs.
When did you start the documentary process?
You know, I was an investment banker when this idea hit me, and within 2 weeks I had quit my job and started raising money to make the movie. So that was going back to 2006.
And you were with Lehman Brothers?
I was Lehman Brothers, yeah.
How many years?
I was there for 4 or 5 years.
Well, let's show a clip. We're not going to show the whole thing, obviously. People can get the whole documentary?
They can. If they go to our website, theunmovie.com, they can pick up a copy.
Here's an excerpt, and we'll get you to comment on it.
It was April 20th, 2009, and the United Nations was opening its anti-racism conference in Geneva, Switzerland. It was designed as a forum to use the global reach of the UN's moral authority to end racism and discrimination, strengthening human rights everywhere.
Racism is a denial of human rights, pure and simple. There comes a time in the affairs of humankind when we must stand firm on the fundamental principles that binds us. There comes a time to reaffirm our faith in fundamental human rights and dignity and worth of us all.
It was only the second conference of its kind in the UN's 60-year history. And as the Secretary General concluded his opening remarks, the man that the United Nations had tapped to deliver the keynote address waited in the wings.
The time is now, ladies and gentlemen.
Who would it be?
The time is now.
Who would be the guiding light who could lead the conference toward achieving its vital goals? Who better than this guy?
I will now kindly ask the Secretariat to escort His Excellency the President to the podium.
This is Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, President of Iran, and something tells me he wasn't the ideal speaker to kick off this conference.
Were you there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Were your cameras in the room?
No, actually, I'll tell you a funny story about that. So we went to the conference because he was the keynote address, and so we like to do, and if you saw the movie, we like to do a lot, kind of some gags, and so the gag we were going to do was right after that he was going to give a press conference. So we were going to go to the press conference, and then I was going to try to put him under citizen's arrest. Get tased on camera for the audience. It'd be fun. Now, luckily for me, my crew missed the flight. So they missed the press conference totally. So I was there by myself with nobody to film me. So we had to come up with another gag. And as you know, at the end of the movie, when I do something that gets me arrested, so that was the end of what we ended up doing for that trip. But what's really funny about that is it really kind of sets up really what the UN is totally about. Their ideas are phenomenal, right? Nobody can argue with the ideals, the idea, the words they say, but what they want to accomplish. And and Ban Ki-moon said it perfectly. Nothing he said we could disagree with. It's a wonderful thing the way he opened up that conference. And what do? They screw it all up by giving a guy, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, one of the snakes living on our planet, the keynote address to open the conference. It's unbelievable.
At this point, somebody's sitting there saying, "I'd guess that Ami Horowitz is Jewish," and this.
Way is the nose or is it the name?
No, it's the name. But I mean, I know because I've read some of the backstories on it. But immediately say this is clearly an Israeli thing for him.
Yeah, I never get the connection between you're Jewish, so you're like a Zion. Now, I'm pro-Israel. Obviously.
Mom's from Israel.
My mom's from Israel. Now, Israel. It's funny. Israel was not mentioned in the movie at all. Like, we didn't talk about it. We could because there's a tremendous amount of bias against Israel. The UN doesn't take any kind of moral stands, unless it's Israel. But I deliberately chose not to put Israel in the movie for that particular reason. I don't want, first of all, I don't want the debate to be about Israel. I want it to be about the United Nations, and Israel could be such a hot-button topic that oftentimes you're going to end up debating whether Israel's policies are good or bad. I don't want to get in that debate.
How is it that somebody that a lot of Americans think is not just a tremendous friend of this country, Mr. Ahmadinejad, how does he get to lead off a human rights conference?
If you ask them, they're going to say, well, it's all process, right? We have a process involved. He submitted his name, so we put him in. Since he was one of the only world leaders to come to the conference, that we give him that spot. So that's what they'll tell you, which may or may not be true, but that's not really the point, right? The point is, if you in fact stand for the ideals you claim to, how could you have that man do this? And even if it's true that the machinations of the UN require you to have him there, then what I expect you to do as Ban Ki-moon is to speak out against the man before he comes up there and say, you know what, everything I said here is being countermanded by this guy, but my hands are tied. But they don't do that. They accept him as the legitimate leader of Iran.
Ban Ki-moon in his second term will be there till 2016, the South Korean. Who, when you went to the UN, did you work with, and what were the rules?
You mean in terms of access and such?
Because I saw part of this where you're walking around the UN at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and going down the hallways, and there's nobody in the offices.
We got unprecedented access to the UN, I think now much to their chagrin. So how we got access is actually kind of a funny story. So I called up Ted Turner. Now, Ted Turner, for people who don't know, is probably the most powerful layperson at the UN. He gave them $1 billion a few years ago, and that, as in all places, you know, when money talks, and $1 billion gives you a lot of power. So knowing that he had access, I called him and spoke with his office, said, I'd like to meet, I'd like to pitch an idea about a movie about the UN. So we had a meeting, talked about the idea behind the movie. Now, I don't know how they came away with this idea, I don't know, but they thought it was a pro-UN movie. So a couple of phone calls to the foundation, and the UN opened up the red carpet for me for full access. I think they may have regretted that decision, but that's how we got it. Was
former Senator Tim Wirth, who runs the foundation,
he was involved in
all this?
Yes.
Have they gotten back to you now that the documentary is finished?
Radio silence from the foundation. The UN itself has spoken out about the movie a number of times. But the UN Foundation has... no, I take it back. They did make a statement. They didn't call me personally, but they made a public statement.
And how much access did you really have?
You know, from what they say, unprecedented. I mean, we were able to shoot anywhere we wanted. As you see in the movie, I'm running around the place, you know, picking up phone calls, and there late at night, which is a real embarrassment because, you know, the last place in the world you want to be is at 5 o'clock standing outside the building. You'll get stampeded by the people running out. I mean, because as you know, all genocide happens between 9 to 5 Eastern Standard Time. So, you know, it works out okay.
Let's go back to another excerpt. By the way, how long is your documentary?
93 minutes to be exact.
This is one about the sexual abuse by UN personnel.
This is a story of betrayal and abuse of men working for the United Nations as so-called peacekeepers, preying on the very people they're supposed to be helping.
Sexual abuse is a continuing problem within the UN peacekeeping ranks. Of the missions launched since 1999, the vast majority, including Côte d'Ivoire, have been implicated in sexual abuse and exploitation. In the Congo alone, there have been hundreds of reported rapes and the creation of a United Nations peacekeeper pedophilia ring. The ring was headed by this man, UN official Didier Bourget.
The abuse by peacekeepers is not the special purview of some countries or a few units. Over the course of our history, every contributor to peacekeeping has had an example of this behavior.
We take now very forceful measures so that any individual who is convinced of sexual abuse will be prosecuted.
You will not get away with it.
There is almost no peacekeeper who has been held accountable and who's had to face the courts because of what they have done.
Now, you may not end up with the kind of justice that everyone in this room could agree on would be appropriate in the circumstances.
My understanding is that they've got a new zero tolerance policy. Somewhere written down in the UN books, it says that UN peacekeepers should not diddle minor children, as if this is something that had to have been written.
Go back to the one fellow that you pointed the finger at with a picture of him. I don't think he had even a shirt on.
Didier Bourget.
Yeah, has he been convicted of that?
He has in France. He was one of the very, very few. Here's the problem, is that the UN, doesn't have any prosecutorial powers, right? So they do is they just send the person, at worst, they send the person back to their home country. Now, most of the countries just simply refuse to prosecute these people. And now, what really often happens in most cases, that nothing even with all the charges, now remember, you're in Africa, you're raping a child, this isn't going to a court of law, there's nobody who's going to hold this person accountable, so the charges are made, if they're brave enough to make the charges, and generally the UN just fluffs it off and just keeps the person working there. Very rarely are they ever sent away, and even rarer than that, Didier Bourget might be one of the only, I think there are only two that I can think of, two examples in the thousands of rape cases anybody's ever been prosecuted.
Why then were the folks at the UN and the woman standing at the podium saying that they were tough on this stuff?
Because they, you know what, whenever you do an interview or you speak to a person in the UN, you walk away thinking they get it. These guys get the problem, they know how to handle it, and you think, all right, they're on top of it. But at the end of the day, nothing ever happens, right? In the movie, you hear them say zero tolerance, probably 15 times in the course of the movie. Yet, the rapes continue unabated. So their rhetoric in no way matches what the action really is on the ground.
Do you know, can you get through all the different stories and figure out what the UN budget is a year?
Yeah, and the other thing about the UN, which is unbelievable, it's meant to represent all nations on the earth. It should be, one of the most transparent organizations on the planet. And the reality is, oddly, it's one of the most opaque. So it's very difficult to get any real hard information about budget issues. But with piecing things together, their budget is roughly, I think, in 2009, which is the last number we have. I'm sorry, 2010. Sorry, the last number we had, it was, I believe, $24 billion.
Does that include, I mean, I've got a list here of all the different organizations, everything from the Food and Agriculture Organization, International Atomic Energy Agency, International Monetary Fund?
No. It includes only what they call the core mission of the UN. So,
and is that $24 billion for 1 year?
Yeah. Now that number is much higher in 2012.
Does that include peacekeeping?
That includes peacekeeping.
And I saw a figure that said that the United States pays 22%.
Yeah, I think somewhere between 22.
But they only pay about $1 billion.
No. See, that's a lie they like to tell. It's $1 billion just for the Secretariat, but does not include so it doesn't include the Human Rights Council, peacekeeping. All of that is outside the $1 billion. So we gave in 2010 $8 billion. They expect 2012 to be over 10.
Why is it that the United States pays 22% of the bill, and Japan, which is the second payer in the list, pays only 12%?
Even worse than that. I mean, China, the second largest economy in the world, they pay, I think their number is
3.1. I've got a list here.
3.1 percent, right? Yeah. I mean, that's what's insane. In fact, if you add in a lot of the money they get from the UN, it actually ends up being much lower than that.
And in Germany, which is only has 80 million people, they pay 8%.
Because we're suckers. We're suckers. You know what? They know, come with good old U.S. and our checkbooks are open. And the reality is, listen, the truth is, I have no problem giving $8 billion or $10 billion or $15 billion to the UN if I knew it was working, right? If I knew these people were solving the problems of the world, I have no problem giving that money. It'd be an honor to do it. But the reality is, we're throwing the money away. And in fact, we are acting as classic enablers, no different than somebody who's enabling a drug addict or enabling a gambler. If you continue to give these people what they want without forcing the change in behavior, what's going to force them to change their behavior? Nothing.
Here's another excerpt, and this has to do with your trip to Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire, yeah. Explain that before we get into it.
So the Ivory Coast, also known as Côte d'Ivoire, my French is not great, so it's embarrassing when I say it, it was a former French colony. They had independence, and they've had a number of major problems. They've had a civil war raging on for years. The UN came in to help try to fix the problem, and some would argue made it far worse.
But you're trying to interview somebody.
Trying to.
Who is it?
I think the person you're referring to was the head of UN peacekeeping in Côte d'Ivoire.
Abu Musa?
Abu Musa.
Let's watch a little bit and you can explain more.
Sure.
I grabbed my cameraman and pretended to be important. Since Abu Musa had to escort the Security Council back to the airport, I finagled my way onto one of the UN's buses. This would be my best chance. Security Council? Yes. These Security Council people seem pretty uptight.
Anybody know a good song we can sing on the way to the airport?
Yeah.
99 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer. Come on, nobody?
There's the man, the head of the UN mission. Sweet, we got him. Time to get some answers.
Tell me about why, the UN here in Côte d'Ivoire is really taking care of the Ivorian people and helping the Ivorian people.
Let me say in general terms, the UN comes into a crisis zone when there is a difference of opinion or position between minimum of two entities.
I was told that there were UN peacekeepers who had killed Ivorians.
The French, at the beginning of the crisis, and here, we had these ex-belligerent fighting each other. That was how the UN came in to be able to help to resolve the...
Sounds to me like he's dodging the question.
See, they were talking about like 50 or 60 Ivorians were killed.
No, I'm not aware.
How could you not be aware of what happened?
Okay.
Not really the answers I was looking for.
Explain all that. Who was the man?
So, I'll give you some background. Okay, so he was the head of UN peacekeeping in Cote d'Ivoire. I believe he was from Chad. A very interesting story about him and Chad and who's populating, these very important offices in the UN. The head of human rights that he brought, one of his buddies from Chad, the head of human rights for Cote d'Ivoire for the United Nations, he was known in Chad as the Butcher. He was known as the main guy for the intelligence agencies who would torture people to get answers. So it gives you a sense of who's populating these offices. And we were confronting him, and the reason why we went there to begin with was because there was a slaughter of unarmed Ivorians who were protesting the French peacekeepers. The peacekeepers who were sent in by the UN were French, the former colonial masters of Cote d'Ivoire, and they did it for the sole reason to put their foot back in the neck of their former colony. And when the people were upset because they were robbing banks, they were shooting people, they protested in front of
the French were?
The French were, yeah. They protested in front of the French peacekeepers, and they opened fire, and they killed a number of them. So we went there to get answers on why they did that, and obviously obfuscation is quite a bit of an art form at the United Nations.
Why did they let you on the bus?
I don't know.
Who'd you ask to do that?
I just said, hey, I got to be on this bus. And they're like, all right.
And where was the bus going from to?
It was taking the Security Council, as it totally by happenstance, Security Council, the entire Security Council was in Cote d'Ivoire at that time. So we figured it'd be a good kind of way to try to get some answers, go and confront the Security Council members. So the bus was taking them from their press conference, which you saw in the film, back to the airport on their private jet to take them back.
Well, the guy sitting next to you that you asked, are you Security Council, did he know that you were taping at the time?
The camera was there. It wasn't a hidden camera. Yeah, they knew what we were filming.
He seemed to hesitate to admit.
I don't think they thought it was a very odd situation on their private bus to have a guy with a camera asking questions.
How did they go along with the 99 bottles of beer on the wall?
They seem not to know that one. I don't understand why. They were a little bit, a bit of stuffed shirts on that bus for some reason. And again, I wasn't on the cool bus, obviously.
If it cost you $4 million before it was over to do this documentary, who paid for it?
Investors. I put some money in myself. As an investment banker, I had access to people who had some funds, and I found people who were like-minded individuals, 50 grand here, 100 grand here, who believed in what we were doing and thought this was a really important issue to get out there.
Did they expect to get their money back?
See, when I started this movie, I didn't have any gray hairs at all. I've got about 40 or 50 now. Each one represents an investor. They're the greatest investors in the world. They didn't pressure me. They understood that this was not something which is generally known as a money-making venture. So they didn't put a lot of pressure for me to return their money, and they're probably going to take a loss, but they've been very good to me. I appreciate that.
The next clip is the UN cannot agree on the definition of terrorism, and we see two people. We see Congressman Rob Simmons, I believe, a Republican, and Daniel Pletka, who is at the American Enterprise Institute. Most of what you see, other than Jody Williams, who would not be categorized as a conservative, are conservatives. Is there any doubt, should there be any doubt in people's minds that this is from the conservative point of view, this documentary? Yeah, not at all. Now, as it happens, the only elected officials we had were Republicans, and we reached out to a lot of Democrats. They just, they didn't want to come on camera. We had more access to Republicans. The truth is, like I said, I'm more conservative. Everybody who worked in the film, other than me, my co-director, the editors, the writers, were all liberals. We had writers from The Daily Show. We had writers from The Onion. Michael Moore's writers and editors worked for us. I was the only conservative. And while it's obviously, taking the UN to task has been a conservative issue, I think it's become more bipartisan of late. I think the movie, has helped in some ways. But no, Jody Williams is really the hero of the movie, and she's as left-wing as you can get. We'll show her eventually. I don't know if she's in this clip or not, but we'll run this clip and continue. Good.
Less than 1 month after September 11th and 11 days after enacting Resolution 1373, Syria was elected to sit on the Security Council.
Syria provides safe haven to terrorist organizations, headquarters, training facilities, infrastructure, intelligence.
Syria is arming Hezbollah in Lebanon. Syria and Iran have been responsible for bringing tens of thousands of rockets into that area. Those rockets aren't for self-defense.
It sponsors, pays for, and arms Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and other terrorist organizations.
Despite its deep connections with terrorism, Syria was elevated to the presidency of the Security Council.
So there are a number of countries which certainly could improve the performance as far as terrorism is concerned.
Maybe the problem is more fundamental than I thought.
How does the UN define terrorism?
Well, technically, the United Nations so far has not been able to define terrorism.
No, the UN member states have not been able to agree upon a definition of terrorism.
Definition of terrorism is a very difficult thing.
In order for you to get yourself up to speed on the UN, how much studying did you have to do?
I probably read 20 or 30 books, dozens and dozens of white papers and thousands, a countless amount of articles. Quite a bit. I mean, I was pretty fluent on the UN and the issues before I started. I mean, obviously this is a polemic. This was not, an unblinking eye, but I came in with a point of view. But I want to understand all, every side of the UN. So I would say the majority of the books I read were pro-UN books. Give me a sense of what they're trying to do. Historically, a lot of it was, the founding, why it was being created, what the thought process was in terms of the framers and what they thought the UN should be. A lot of very interesting stuff about what the ideals were behind the United Nations.
The last figure I saw was there are 193 countries that are member of the UN, members, and there are only 196 countries in the world, something like that. Vatican's not a member, and I think Taiwan's not a member, and maybe a couple of other places. But
the Taiwan thing is to me as insulting as you can get. I mean, the Vatican they're not a member, but they have observer status. Taiwan, a Taiwanese diplomat can't walk into the building. It really is one of the more offensive issues.
And they used to be a member.
They used to be a member, yeah, until we switched and Red China became.
Did you ask anybody about that?
I did, and they give you the same, BS. Listen, there's one China, and that's the People's Republic of China, so therefore Taiwan is not a country.
Here's some more from your documentary, You and Me. By the way, who named that?
My wife. My wife came up with the name, and if I wanted to stay married, that was the name we were sticking with.
This is more on terrorism.
Sometimes the UN does more than just have a dialogue. For example, the UN's Palestinian Refugee Program, UNRWA, provides services for kids, the elderly, this goat, and terrorists?
UNRWA was peopled by officials who were terribly, terribly sympathetic to Hamas and other extremist Palestinian organizations.
Oh, I'm sure that there are Hamas members on the UNRWA payroll, and I don't see that's a crime.
It may not be a crime, but wouldn't the taxpayers of the world be disturbed by the office of this UN staffer who hung suicide bomber tributes on his wall? Personally, I prefer pictures of my kids. Or the UN allowing the use of its vehicles for terrorist getaways.
UNRWA has a very poor idea of where its resources are used, or, for example, whether its vehicles are used in terrorist attacks. We have seen tapes of vehicles clearly marked on the roof as UNRWA vehicles with RPG weapons being loaded to carry out attacks.
So the UN is directing our tax dollars to decorate offices and fund ambulance ride-alongs.
Mark Kirk, senator now from Illinois, was a congressman. And when did you interview him? Do you remember how many years ago?
God, no.
I mean, if you started in 2006 with all this, you were done with it when?
We were done with it in 2010. I think that's right.
And how long has it been out and available for people to see?
It came out June 1st in theaters, and then it came out on video on demand and DVD like a month ago.
Did you give the Ted Turner, Tim Worth group at the UN Foundation a chance to talk during this documentary?
I had somebody reach out to them to do a screening, and I have not heard back.
But did you offer them a chance to have a rebuttal in the movie itself?
Inside the movie?
Yeah.
No.
Why not?
It's my movie. Listen, the entire movie, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of, listen, I think half the interviews are probably UN people kind of, giving their say. But like I said, this was not meant to be sort of an even-handed, here's my point of view, here's your point of view. Like I said, it's a polemic, and I came in saying, this is my thesis, and here's how I'm going about proving it.
Did you ever talk to
I'd be happy to debate them, on a show such as this, but no, never had them as kind of part of the movie itself.
Did you ever talk to Michael Moore about documentaries, and what was his reaction if you did?
I did. And Michael actually and I had become very friendly, oddly enough, through this process. And he was very honored that he was an inspiration to make the movie. Michael, yeah, we've spoken extensively about it. He disagrees vehemently with the premise, in the sense that he, in his words, we can't give the UN enough money, and he thinks they're doing a great job with it. He was very excited that, first of all, he's always believed that it's really important for conservatives to make movies. I think he's thought, and he's right, that the documentary format has really been owned by the left. And I think the right's make a huge mistake not creating, compelling documentaries, because I think the left made the same exact mistake with talk radio. When talk radio first came out, they didn't get involved. They ceded it to the right, and now it's a really dominant form of the political conversation, and they can't get a foothold back into it. They've tried, and now they've failed. It's too late. And I think the right is making the same mistake with documentary and the film art form. And if they don't kind of wake up and say, we got to make high quality, engaging, entertaining movies, then we're going to see that to the left. And then this, the way our politics is set up, that's a big part of the political dialogue, and it's a huge mistake.
Where did you get your conservative views?
Oof. I guess it was informed a lot by the way I was raised. My parents were both, I would call them, they were Reagan supporters. They were very much centrist, very pro-Israel. Very much, I would say, they were very socially moderate, but I think they were very hawkish when it came to foreign policy. I think they were very concerned about the way the U.S. spent their money. And it ended up being, now that I think about it, I got it from my parents in a lot of ways.
Where were you born?
I was born in Los Angeles.
And how long have you lived in New York City?
Oof. Now I'm going to betray my age a little bit, but I've been there for, I think, 17 years.
And where did you go to college?
I went to USC, University of Southern California.
And when did Mom come from Israel? And I assume she's still an Israeli citizen. You are probably too, aren't you?
Technically, yeah. In fact, I'm supposed to travel to Israel on an Israeli passport, but I don't have one, so there's nobody watching this, right?
Right, no.
So my mom moved to the United States, I believe, when she was 22, or very early 20s. Met my dad in Los Angeles, got married, and had me.
Are they still out?
My father passed away a couple of years ago, and my mother's still in Los Angeles, although we're trying very desperately to get her to move to New York.
Let's go back to the documentary. This particular section is Oil for Food Program Scandal. Let's watch.
Well, I don't know what I'm missing here. Why was a stop not put to it when they immediately saw that there was corruption rife in it and that was working exactly the opposite way they intended it to?
We're talking about an extremely mismanaged operation. Our senior managers were not on speaking terms with each other. So when issues like that came up, issues like indications that there is a kickback mechanism, it would be very easy for these things to get stuck in the system.
I have, in my mind, little or no doubt that the failure to move aggressively to clean up the program was because there was enough money being made by those who had a stake in the program continuing that, in fact, the cleanup never occurred.
And as for any resignations?
I don't anticipate anyone to resign. We are carrying on with our work.
Do you feel it's time for the good of the organization to step down?
Hell no.
At the UN, no one has gone to jail, no one has even been fired for the biggest scam in the history of humanitarian relief.
Why would anybody resign?
It was Claudia Rosette, who's done a lot of reporting on.
She was one of the major driving forces uncovering.
Who was the gentleman that you were first talking to?
A guy named Michael Susan. Michael was one of the first whistleblowers on the Oil for Food program.
Worked for?
He worked directly for the head of the Oil for Food program, Benan Savan. He worked with him, and he wrote an extremely funny book on his experience called Backstabbing for Beginners, about his time at the United Nations. And it was, it reads as a comedy because the whole thing, and the whole thing of the UN, that's why we decided to focus on a lot of comedy in the movie. That's why we hired, like I said, Michael Moore's writers and the guys from The Onion, because the whole thing, as sad as it is, and it's tremendously sad, it's just rife for satire and humor because it's so ridiculous. I mean, that scene there says it all, right? The biggest humanitarian scandal in the history of the world, and they say somebody's going to resign, his answer is hell no. It's ludicrous.
Do you have an opinion of Kofi Annan?
You know, it's funny. I thought when we started the movie that he would be kind of like the boogeyman in the film. And what I ended up finding, the more we started talking to people and researching and shooting, was he really isn't. He's not a bad man. I don't think he was corrupt. I don't think so. I just think he has the same moral blindness that that affects a lot of these UN diplomats. I mean, the real evil guy and the real boogeyman that comes out in the movie was Boutros Ghali.
Who was 10 years there.
2 Boutros or 3 Boutros, I can't remember.
Boutros,
yeah. So he was, Boutros Squared, we call him. So he was there for, 4 years. He was Secretary General for 4 years. I think he had 1 term, if I'm not mistaken. I don't believe I am. Am I wrong?
I'm not. I don't have the list in front of me.
Okay, I believe
but I looked at the list. And Ban Ki-moon, what's your opinion of him?
I was really excited when he was first elected. In fact, I was worried it might ruin the movie because here's a South Korean, an ally of the United States, and I thought he would really, hopefully, make some change here. This is not Boutros Ghali. This is not Kofi Annan. And it's funny about him. The first, really soon after he was put in place, I remember that they hung Saddam Hussein, and he came out with a statement which I thought was going to change the tenor of the United Nations. That people were really attacking the Iraqis for hanging, basically applying capital punishment to this butcher. And he made a statement, maybe the next day, and he said, maybe we shouldn't focus on Saddam's death, but let's focus on the fact of how many people he killed. And I said, this guy gets it. This guy may actually be he may be a harbinger for change. And the next day, they got to him. Because the next day he made another statement saying, don't misunderstand what I was saying. The fact they killed him was terrible. I speak out against it. It's not the way we should be doing things. And he changed the way he was viewed.
Did you talk to him?
We did not. I came close at a Knicks game, and I was walking up to him to introduce myself to him, and 2 burly bodyguards pushed me away.
Here's more from your documentary.
Hell yeah, we knew in Rwanda. Hell yeah, they knew. Mr. Annan's office knew. Clear line of faxes from General Dallaire saying, here's what's going to happen, and here's modest authority I request. Operational authority, doesn't need Security Council approval. And one of them was just literally to protect and seize an arms cache. That's a pretty modest military operation. And militarily, it would do what it would do, but more than that, it would send a signal that we in the UN know, and he was told no. He was told stand down. He was told it's literally, quote unquote, it's more important for you to protect the image of impartiality of the UN in the face of genocide than it is for you to take these rather modest operations.
Were you or the other members of the Security Council made aware of Dallaire's cable?
No, it was never brought to my attention, and I know from talking to many of the other 15 ambassadors that it came as a complete and horrifying surprise to them as well. The Security Council was never apprised of this at all.
I literally felt that I had been chopped at the knees. That I had this thing in the bag and that it had been taken away from me.
Kofi Annan and his team failed to act on this opportunity to stop the genocide before it started.
Did you talk to Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian general who was in the UN peacekeeping group?
Did not. Couldn't get access to him, unfortunately. We tried a number of times. So we had a number of interviews that he gave that we were able to splice into the movie. I mean, he's really one of the few heroes of that very dark period.
Did you go to Rwanda?
We did not.
How many places did you go for the movie?
We were Africa, Europe, Asia, all over the U.S. We traveled around the world.
And in the end, how much?
$2 million only gets you so far.
Yeah. How many hours did you record?
hundreds and hundreds of hours.
Did anybody figure out what you were doing at the UN as this thing went along?
No, they never did. You know, I take it back. They did figure it out toward the end, and when I went to Geneva, when we opened that clip with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in Geneva, they were getting a sense of what we were about. In fact, I recall I was walking down the hallway, and we were credentialed, and walking down the hallway, and there was some guy eating a sandwich. He looked up at me. He worked for the UN, and I saw his mouth drop that I was there. And he runs up to me and goes, "Mr. Horowitz, Mr. Horowitz, why are you here?" I said, "No, we're shooting, we're just doing the tail end of shooting for the movie." And he goes, "You can't be here." I said, "Well, I've got a credential that says I can be here." And then he runs off to, I guess, try to revoke my credential, but they couldn't do it. You know, if you can use their bureaucracy against them, which is what we were very good at doing that. So they ended up throwing me out, and after that one stunt at the end. But no, only at the end did they figure out what we were up to.
And what did they do then?
They didn't do anything. What can they do? I mean,
in the end, meaning when they saw the documentary?
No. I mean, toward the end of, we were already in editing at that point when we shot the Geneva part. The Geneva thing kind of just fell in our lap, so we stopped editing to go shoot this thing, and then we came back. So during what they call principal filming of the movie, they had no clue. But it was afterwards where they started getting a sense of what we were up to.
If you, knowing what you know about the UN, and if you were pro-UN and sitting in that chair, what are some of the things you might say about this documentary? I know you don't call it a documentary, that would argue with your premise?
It's an interesting question. I think I would say if I was them, there are a few things I would say. I would first say, why didn't you give us equal time, right? Now, I mean, my answer to that is simply, it's not your movie. It's my movie, and I crafted it the way I wanted to. Like I said, it's a polemic. It's meant to be proving my thesis. But I think they would, you can argue that. I think, the argument I hear most often is, yeah, we have problems, we have a lot of issues, but it's better than nothing. It's all we have, and that's not good enough for me. That's not an acceptable answer. We can be better. We have to be better. We deserve better. As a collective human race, we deserve better than what the UN is offering us. And the cop-out of it's all we have, it just doesn't cut the mustard for me.
As you were going around the UN and talking to people, what do they think of the United States?
There's a real disdain for the United States. I think that they find this unipolar world that we live in to be obnoxious to them. I think that they see the world as a better place and a safer place as a multipolar world. And I think this notion of American democracy, this notion of our focus on freedom, is something they find distasteful. Because their view is, not everybody wants freedom, not every country is going to be free, and we need to accept that. And I think they look at the U.S. With a tremendous mass disdain. I think, I know it.
And why is there such dislike of the Jews? I mean, and by the way, if you put it in context, what are 300 million plus Arabs and like a total of 14 million Jews in the world?
Right.
What's the disdain all about? Why do they hate the Jews?
The UN or the Arabs?
Both.
Okay. I don't think the UN hates Jews. I think there are times where I have noticed it becoming anti-Semitic, but I think as a general rule, it's really more anti-Israel than anti-Jewish.
That's really what my question should have been.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I think a lot of it comes from, I've said before that, the UN, I was actually raised to be very respectful of the UN because I think, we owe the UN a debt of gratitude because Israel was created in the halls of the United Nations. I almost feel like the UN looks at that as their original sin and have been trying to erase that problem ever since. I think that if it happened today, if it came to a vote again today, in a million years, it never would pass. And I think that you said it. You have a very large bloc of the United Nations made up of Arab nations, and they will to their dying days, they will fight anything which they view as helping the state of Israel. And in fact, their agenda of being anti-Israel is really which dominates the UN agenda. And if you're asking me, why the Arabs and they are anti-Jewish, not just anti-Israel, why that is, It's tough to say. I mean, you really have to go into the Arab psyche. I think a lot of it comes from jealousy. I think that they look at a small little country of 6 million people in the state of Israel, and they see a tremendous success. And you look anywhere else in the region, and you see nothing but abysmal failure. Yet they have more people, more money, and they wonder why not us. And I think a lot of it stems from that. A lot of it is cultural. I think that's a big part of it. I think they have a long way to go for them to join modernity. And I think that, you know, they need, if we want to have a safer world, the Arab world has to join modernity.
The last clip is with Jody Williams, but before we do that, who is she and why did you use her?
Jody Williams, she's a real kick in the pants. Jody Williams was a woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize. I believe it was for mines. And she came to my attention because she was asked by the Human Rights Council at the time to go to Sudan and come up with a report of what's going on. I mean, the whole world knew what was going on, but they needed a report. So they chose her because she won the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, they didn't do much due diligence on her, because if they did, they wouldn't have chosen her. She is a plain-speaking firebrand. And while she's a bit crazy, and I love her for that, she speaks the truth to power. That's what she's all about. So they sent her out there, and she came back with a damning report. Damning in terms of what the Sudanese were doing to their people, damning in terms of what the UN was not doing to stop it. And when she came in, they did whatever they could. They read the report. They were doing whatever they could to stop her from presenting.
Here is our last clip from your movie.
We believe today that the report before us is seriously flawed in a manner that sheds serious shadows on its legitimacy.
We do not consider that the document has the requisite legitimacy.
And we want to refer to the positive steps taken by the government of Sudan.
And the report cannot be considered comprehensive, objective, authentic, and accurate.
And suffers from the lack of credibility.
My last point is on credibility, and it's not about ours, it's about yours. The world hung its head in shame and said, never again. Well, too many of us have lost hope that never again seems to have no applicability whatsoever in Darfur. When will the world hang its head in shame again? And our job is to attempt to try to alleviate the suffering of the people of Darfur who are being raped, pillaged, and burned, while political wrangling goes on here in the hallowed halls of the United Nations. Thank you.
So there were 20 or 30 recommendations, and one was implemented. Not a great batting average.
Correct. The reason they accepted one is not because they particularly care about the report or Darfur. They did it because they have to show the council does something, or it won't continue to exist.
I don't know whether Jody Williams is right or wrong, but when you sit there and listen to her report and then you hear everybody else chime in against it, what's going on? Do those people really, those representatives of those countries really believe what they're saying? No,
I don't think so. They're protecting their friends. That's what it is. They're protecting. They've got each other's backs, and like I'm not sure she said in the clip, but if Iran is going to turn on Sudan, what happens when the world turns on Iran, right? Because Iran's doing maybe not quite as bad, but not that far away. Or North Korea, right, which is a countrywide gulag. So these people aren't going to condemn another evildoer because they're doing the same thing. I mean, maybe at a different level, but so they're all trying to protect each other. That's really one of the main problems of the United Nations, actually.
I don't know how much you've thought about this, but the National Security Council has 15 members. The UN Security Council, 5 of them are permanent.
Right.
China, Russia, France, United States, and Great Britain.
Right.
And then you have 10 additional that serve for 2 years at a time.
Right. And
then you have the General Assembly. But the interesting thing about the General Assembly is that I think something like 3% of the delegates is all you even though they don't have the money and they're not involved, could stop something.
Right.
I mean, did you talk to anybody about, and of course the 5 permanent members of the Security Council can also veto a resolution.
So there's a lot of ossification in the UN because of the way it's structured. And we did actually a lot on that, but we ended up not including the movie because it's boring. Who the hell wants to talk about that? But ultimately, it does lead to a lot of problems. On the other hand, you could look at it and say, thank God, get on your knees and thank God the U.S. has veto power, because if you think the UN is bad with what we have now, you should see what the UN would be like without U.S. veto power. I mean, it would be insane. It would be, the entire UN would be focused on the United States and their atrocities, quote unquote, and Israel. So,
what do you say to the American people that the United States is paying 22% of the bill and no one comes close to that?
It's a travesty. Like I said, China, the #2 economy, the quote unquote new tiger of Asia, 3%, and with their cashback program, less than that. It's horrific. It's hard to make the case to the American people that we should continue funding this. Like I said, I'm not against funding the UN if it works. I say, hell, give them more if what they're doing really works. But we have to take, we cannot expect the UN to change if we continue to write blank checks, which is essentially what it is. Continue what you're doing, here's your money, we'll ask questions later.
The World Bank's involved in the UN?
Yes.
The food program?
Yep.
World Food Program, all that. I mean, isn't that World Health Organization?
Those are good things. Don't get me wrong. I mean, and we talk in the movie, at the beginning about some of the stuff they do right. And I certainly would not argue we should cut funding to those things. I think we should take a close look at what we're doing in terms of security and human rights. And I think that's where we should really take a laser beam approach and say, if they're not doing it right, we're going to pull funding. Now, I wouldn't suggest pulling funding on any of the things you just mentioned before.
You came from the investment banking world, Lehman Brothers for 5 years. Are you glad that you left that business and came into this business?
Is that a rhetorical question? Of course. God, Jesus, I'm flying around the world, making movies. It's phenomenal. It's great.
Any time did the writers, which you say are mostly liberals, object to any of the content of your documentary?
No. In fact, a lot of them were pushing me to go further. I think these were all issues they were not well versed in at all. This was a universe they were just getting introduced to, and they were shocked. They were shocked. They felt betrayed because they were, like I said, they were all left-wingers. They all were raised and inculcated with the notion the UN was making the world a better place. And particularly when you start seeing around security issues, human rights issues, what the UN was really doing, they thought we weren't pushing the envelope enough. Yeah, they were blown away.
Is there going to be a second documentary from Ami Horowitz?
There will probably be a second documentary, but I can promise you this: it will not be You and Me Part 2. If I never hear the words United Nations again, it'll be too soon.
Why?
Ugh, I'm just sick of it. It's just, you spend so much time on one topic or one issue. It's really difficult to keep going, and also it just drives you insane. I don't know how the people who cover the UN full time can do it. The insanity of that place drives you to the brink of madness. I mean, it's every time you see it, they do something so unbelievably ridiculous that it just drives you to the edge of insanity.
Those who want to see the full documentary, You and Me, U.N.Me, can find it where? TheUNmovie.com. And how much is it?
I think it's a pretty good deal. I think it's $15. I think it's like $14.99. I think for this day and age, it's a pretty good price.
And what's the best thing anybody's done because of this documentary to you, or you've observed?
A lot. There's a lot going on at Capitol Hill now around the movie. We've screened the movie now for congressmen and senators. We've screened the Hill now twice. And we're seeing a lot of action, not just from Republicans, but I've had Democrats walk up to me and use the words like, and these are literal words, "You've opened up my eyes." It's been really, it's been gratifying to see that we're starting to make some movement, because I think we're in a situation now where we just can't afford to throw money away anymore. And I think that if we can use that money to better the world, then we should do it. And if we can't, then we just need to start looking about reallocating those resources into something else, and maybe even a competing organization, one whose ideals and are shared by all, one that's based in freedom, a democracy-based organization. Maybe that's where we need to be looking.
We thank you, Ami Horowitz. We're out of time.
I thank you. It's been a pleasure.
DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at qna.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.